The prosecutor held up the medical report, her hands trembling with barely contained rage as she addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is not just one life destroyed, not two, not three, eight. 8 young men, all between the ages of 21 and 25, all graduate students at one of the most prestigious universities in this country, all infected with HIV by the woman sitting at that defense table. Dr. Vanessa Cole didn't just betray the trust placed in her as a professor. She weaponized her body. She systematically seduced 8 of her students over a 3-year period, knowing that she was HIV positive, and she never told a single one of them. The courtroom erupted. Families of the victims sobbed, reporters frantically typed, and sitting at the defense table, perfectly composed in a navy blue suit, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun, Dr. Vanessa Cole showed no emotion whatsoever. She stared straight ahead, as if the prosecutor were discussing someone else entirely, as if 8 young men's lives hadn't been irrevocably altered by her actions. But what the jury didn't know yet, what would only come out as the trial progressed, was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Because Dr. Cole hadn't just failed to disclose her status. She had actively hidden it. She had lied about being tested. She had convinced her victims not to use protection by claiming she was on birth control and had been recently screened. And most shockingly of all, she had kept a journal documenting each encounter, rating her students, describing their reactions when they eventually learned the truth, detailing their fear, their devastation, their rage. It was a journal that would reveal Dr. Vanessa Cole wasn't just reckless or negligent. She was calculating, methodical, and some would argue evil. She had turned her students into victims not through passion or carelessness, but through what prosecutors would call biological assault with intent to harm. This is the only witness. And this is the story of how a brilliant psychology professor at Columbia University used her position of power to prey on vulnerable graduate students, how she infected 8 young men with a life-altering disease, and how one victim's decision to speak up exposed a predator who had been hiding behind academic prestige for years. This is the story of betrayal at its most intimate, of power abused at its most devastating, and of justice that came too late for the 8 men whose lives would never be the same. New York City, 2018. Columbia University, one of the Ivy League's crown jewels, sits in Morningside Heights, overlooking Manhattan. The psychology department is housed in Schermerhorn Hall, a Gothic revival building where some of the most influential psychological research in the world takes place. It's a place where students dream of studying, where professors compete for tenure, where reputations are built on publications and prestige. Dr. Vanessa Cole joined Columbia's faculty in 2015 as an assistant professor of clinical psychology. She was 34 years old, had earned her PhD from Stanford, published extensively on trauma and attachment theory, and was considered one of the rising stars in her field. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, with the kind of confidence that made students hang on her every word. She was also married to Dr. Richard Cole, a successful surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. To everyone on the outside, Vanessa Cole had everything: beauty, brains, career success, and a picture-perfect marriage. But Dr. Cole had a secret. In 2014, a year before she joined Columbia, she had been diagnosed as HIV positive. She had contracted it from a brief affair during a period when her marriage was struggling. She had been treated immediately, put on antiretroviral therapy, and her viral load had become undetectable within months. According to her doctors, with treatment, she could live a normal lifespan. And if she maintained an undetectable viral load and used protection, the risk of transmission was negligible. But here's what Dr. Cole never disclosed to anyone except her husband. She often went off her medication. She hated the side effects: nausea, fatigue, headaches. She convinced herself that because her viral load had been undetectable, she didn't need to be as vigilant. And most critically, when her marriage fell apart in 2016 and she began having affairs with her graduate students, she never told any of them about her status. The first victim was 23-year-old Adrian Mitchell, a second-year graduate student in the fall of 2017. Adrian was brilliant, focused, and deeply committed to his research on adolescent trauma. He had grown up in Brooklyn, the son of a single mother who had worked 3 jobs to put him through college. Getting into Columbia's psychology PhD program was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. He was going to be the first person in his family with a doctorate. He was going to make his mother proud. Dr. Cole noticed Adrian immediately. He was handsome, ambitious, and hungry for mentorship. She offered to be his dissertation advisor, invited him to her office hours, engaged him in conversations that went beyond academics. She told him about her troubled marriage, about how her husband didn't understand her, about how lonely she was. Adrian, young and flattered by the attention from such an accomplished professor, didn't see the manipulation for what it was. Their affair began in November 2017. Dr. Cole invited Adrian to a conference in Boston, ostensibly to help with her presentation. They shared a hotel room, to save on the department's budget, she said. That night, after drinks at the hotel bar, she seduced him. Adrian was nervous. This was his professor, a married woman, someone who held power over his academic future. But Dr. Cole reassured him. She told him she was leaving her husband anyway. She told him this was real, not just a fling. And when he asked about protection, she laughed it off, said she was on birth control and had been tested recently, that everything was clean. It was a lie. She hadn't been tested in over a year. Her viral load was not undetectable because she had been off her medication for months, and she knew it. The affair lasted 3 months. During that time, they had unprotected sex multiple times. Dr. Cole was careful. She made sure Adrian never found any of her HIV medications, never saw her medical records, never had reason to suspect anything was wrong. When the affair ended in February 2018, Dr. Cole simply told Adrian she needed to focus on her marriage and that their relationship couldn't continue. Adrian was heartbroken but accepting. He thought it had just been an intense but ultimately doomed romance between 2 consenting adults. He had no idea what she had given him. If you're following this story and want to hear more cases where people in power abused their positions in the most devastating ways, don't forget to subscribe to The Only Witness. We tell the stories that expose predators hiding behind prestige and demand accountability for the vulnerable. 6 months after the affair ended, Adrian started feeling sick. Flu-like symptoms that wouldn't go away, fever, night sweats, swollen lymph nodes, crushing fatigue. He went to Student Health Services in August 2018, thinking he had mono or some virus he'd picked up over the summer. The doctor ran standard tests and then, as a precaution given Adrian's symptoms, suggested an HIV test. Adrian agreed, not thinking much of it. He had only been with one person in the past year, Dr. Cole, and she had assured him she was clean. He went home, forgot about the test, and focused on the start of the new academic year. A week later, he got a call from Student Health asking him to come in immediately. When he arrived, the doctor's face told him everything he needed to know before a word was spoken. The test was positive. Adrian Mitchell was HIV positive. Adrian's world collapsed. He sat in that small exam room, unable to process what he was hearing. HIV. The disease he had learned about in health class, the disease that had decimated a generation in the 80s and 90s, the disease that even now, with all the medical advances, carried a stigma that could define the rest of his life. How? How was this possible? And then he remembered. Dr. Cole. She was the only person he had been with. She had to be the source. But she had told him she was tested. She had told him everything was fine. Had she lied? Or had she not known? Adrian called her immediately. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He left a message, his voice shaking. Dr. Cole, this is Adrian. I need to talk to you urgently. It's about my health. Please call me back as soon as you get this. She didn't call back that day, or the next, or the day after that. When Adrian finally saw her on campus, she was walking out of a faculty meeting with other professors. He approached her, desperate, needing answers. Dr. Cole, did you get my messages? I really need to talk to you. She looked at him with cool detachment, as if he were just another student she barely remembered. "Adrian, I'm in the middle of something. Email me if you need to schedule office hours." And she walked away, leaving him standing there, alone, terrified, and beginning to realize that the woman he had trusted, the woman he had been intimate with, knew exactly what she had done to him. Adrian went to the police in September 2018. He filed a report with the NYPD Special Victims Unit, explaining what had happened, providing medical records showing his HIV diagnosis and the timeline of his relationship with Dr. Cole. Detective Maria Santos was assigned the case. She had handled sexual assault cases for years, but had never dealt with a case quite like this. A professor accused of knowingly transmitting HIV to a student. Detective Santos began investigating. She contacted Columbia University, who immediately lawyered up and refused to cooperate beyond confirming that Dr. Cole was a faculty member and that Adrian had been her student. She obtained medical records through subpoena and discovered that Dr. Cole had been diagnosed with HIV in 2014 and had been prescribed antiretroviral medication. The records also showed that her viral load had fluctuated significantly over the years, indicating she was not consistently taking her medication. But proving that Dr. Cole had knowingly transmitted HIV to Adrian would be difficult. She could claim she didn't know her viral load was high at the time. She could claim she believed she was undetectable and therefore not infectious. New York's law on HIV transmission was complex. It wasn't automatically a crime to have sex without disclosing HIV-positive status unless it could be proven there was intent to harm or reckless disregard for the other person's health. Detective Santos needed more evidence. She needed a pattern. She needed more victims. And that's when the investigation took a turn that shocked everyone involved. Before we continue, hit subscribe to The Only Witness, because some truths are too dark to stay buried. We tell the stories that expose predators and fight for victims who deserve justice. Detective Santos began quietly interviewing other graduate students in Columbia's psychology department. She was discreet, not wanting to tip off Dr. Cole or cause a panic on campus. She asked general questions about student-faculty relationships, about whether anyone had observed inappropriate behavior, about whether anyone knew of other students who might have been involved with Dr. Cole. What she discovered was horrifying. Over the next 3 months, 7 more young men came forward. 7 more graduate students, all between the ages of 21 and 26. All from Columbia's psychology PhD program, all of whom had had affairs with Dr. Vanessa Cole between 2017 and 2020, and all of them had recently been diagnosed with HIV. The victims were Adrian Mitchell, 23. First victim, infected in late 2017, diagnosed August 2018. Jason Rivera, 25. Had affair with Dr. Cole from March to June 2018, diagnosed with HIV in October 2018. David Park, 24. Had affair with Dr. Cole in the fall of 2018, diagnosed with HIV in January 2019. Marcus Thompson, 22. Had affair with Dr. Cole from January to April 2019, diagnosed with HIV in June 2019. Kevin Anderson, 26. Had affair with Dr. Cole in summer 2019, diagnosed with HIV in September 2019. Brandon Lewis, 23. Had affair with Dr. Cole from September 2019 to January 2020, diagnosed with HIV in March 2020. Tyler Washington, 25. Had affair with Dr. Cole in early 2020, diagnosed with HIV in May 2020. Eric Martinez, 24. Had affair with Dr. Cole from June to August 2020, diagnosed with HIV in October 2020. 8 men, 8 lives irrevocably changed. 8 futures now defined by a chronic illness that would require lifelong medication, monitoring, and the constant awareness of their HIV-positive status. Each victim told the same story. Dr. Cole had initiated the relationship, had assured them she was tested and clean, had convinced them not to use protection, and had never once mentioned she was HIV positive. Some of the men had asked directly, "Are you sure you're okay? Should we use protection?" And Dr. Cole had lied to their faces, saying she was absolutely certain she was healthy. Detective Santos brought all 8 men together in November 2020. It was the first time they realized they weren't alone, that Dr. Cole had done this to multiple students. The meeting was emotional: anger, grief, disbelief, and a growing sense that what had happened to them wasn't just negligence or bad luck. It was intentional. It was calculated. It was predatory. "She knew," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "She had to have known. You don't accidentally sleep with 8 different people without protection when you're HIV positive. She knew what she was doing." Detective Santos agreed, and that's when she obtained the warrant that would change everything. On November 20th, 2020, police raided Dr. Vanessa Cole's apartment in the Upper West Side. What they found in her home office was the smoking gun that transformed the case from reckless endangerment to something far more sinister. Hidden in a locked drawer in her desk was a journal, a detailed, handwritten journal that Dr. Cole had been keeping since 2017. In it, she documented every encounter with each student. She wrote about how she had selected them, looking for students who were ambitious, isolated, hungry for mentorship. She described how she seduced them, what lies she told them, how she made sure they didn't suspect her HIV status. But most damningly, she wrote about her motivations, and they were chilling. "These men think they're so brilliant," one entry read. "They think they're going to change the world with their research, their degrees, their precious careers. They look at me and see a professor, a mentor, someone to learn from. They have no idea that I'm about to change their lives in a way they'll never forget. They'll carry me with them forever now. They'll never be able to forget me." Another entry, written after she had slept with Jason Rivera. "He asked me 3 times if I was sure I was clean. I looked him right in the eye and lied. It was almost too easy. He trusted me completely. They all do. That's the thing about power. People want to believe you'll use it to help them, not destroy them." And perhaps most disturbing, an entry from July 2020, after Eric Martinez had confronted her about a rumor he'd heard that she might be HIV positive. "Eric is getting suspicious. I need to end things with him soon. But not before a few more encounters. I want to make absolutely sure he's the last one anyway. 8 feels like a good number. Any more and the pattern becomes too obvious. Time to move on to a different university, a different set of students who don't know my history. Fresh start." The journal made it clear. Dr. Vanessa Cole had not accidentally or recklessly infected 8 men. She had done it deliberately. She had weaponized her HIV status, using it as a way to permanently mark the students she had seduced, to ensure they would never forget her. To exercise a form of power and control that went beyond anything comprehensible to normal people. Prosecutors would later describe it as one of the most disturbing cases of biological assault they had ever encountered. Dr. Vanessa Cole was arrested on November 22, 2020, and charged with 8 counts of reckless endangerment, 8 counts of assault in the first degree, and 8 counts of criminal transmission of HIV. She was held without bail, deemed a danger to the community. Columbia University placed her on immediate administrative leave and launched an internal investigation into how she had been able to prey on students for 3 years without anyone noticing or reporting her behavior. The answer to that question was damning for the university. It turned out that at least 3 students had reported feeling uncomfortable about Dr. Cole's behavior over the years, her tendency to blur professional boundaries, to invite students to her home alone, to make comments that seemed flirtatious. But the complaints had been dismissed by the department chair as misunderstandings or personality conflicts. The culture in academia, particularly at prestigious institutions like Columbia, was one where professors were given enormous deference, and where students were often told to handle conflicts on their own or risk being seen as difficult. Columbia would eventually settle with all 8 victims for undisclosed amounts, though reports suggested the total payout exceeded $30 million. The university also implemented new policies for monitoring faculty-student relationships, mandatory reporting of boundary violations, and anonymous reporting mechanisms for students. But no amount of policy changes would undo what had been done to Adrian, Jason, David, Marcus, Kevin, Brandon, Tyler, and Eric. If you're new here, subscribe to The Only Witness. We tell real stories that still echo through time, stories that expose predators in positions of power and demand justice for those they harm. The trial of Dr. Vanessa Cole began in June 2021 and lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented the journal entries, which were read aloud in court, causing audible gasps from the gallery. They presented medical records showing Dr. Cole's HIV diagnosis, her inconsistent medication compliance, and her fluctuating viral loads. They presented testimony from her own doctor, who confirmed that Dr. Cole had been explicitly counseled about the risks of unprotected sex and the legal and ethical obligation to disclose her status to partners. And most powerfully, they called all 8 victims to testify. Adrian Mitchell was the first. He described the affair, the lies Dr. Cole had told him, and the moment he learned he was HIV positive. "I was 23 years old," he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I had my whole life ahead of me. I was going to get my PhD, become a therapist, help kids who grew up like I did. Now, every day I have to take medication. Every day I have to think about my status when I meet someone new. Every day I have to live with what she did to me. She didn't just give me a disease. She took my future and rewrote it." Jason, David, Marcus, Kevin, Brandon, Tyler, and Eric all told similar stories. Each described how Dr. Cole had made them feel special, chosen, how she had manipulated their ambition and their trust, and how their diagnoses had shattered their lives. Several of them broke down on the stand. One, Marcus Thompson, had to pause his testimony for 10 minutes because he couldn't stop crying as he described telling his mother he was HIV positive and watching her heart break. The defense's strategy was to claim that Dr. Cole had believed her viral load was undetectable at the time of each encounter and therefore believed she couldn't transmit the virus. They presented testimony from an HIV specialist who explained that people with undetectable viral loads have essentially no risk of transmission, a medical fact known as UU, undetectable equals untransmittable. But the prosecution destroyed that defense with Dr. Cole's own medical records, which showed that her viral load had been detectable during several of the time periods when she was having affairs with her students. And even if it had been undetectable, the journal entries made it clear that her intent was to infect them, that she saw the transmission of HIV as a way of permanently marking them. The defense also tried to argue that the students bore some responsibility for not insisting on protection, that they were adults who made choices. This argument backfired spectacularly when the prosecutor pointed out that Dr. Cole had been in a position of power over these students. She controlled their grades, their dissertation committees, their letters of recommendation, essentially their entire academic futures. The power dynamic made true consent impossible. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On June 28, 2021, they returned guilty verdicts on all 24 counts. Dr. Vanessa Cole showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Her husband, Dr. Richard Cole, who had divorced her shortly after her arrest, was not in the courtroom. At sentencing in August 2021, all 8 victims gave impact statements. Adrian Mitchell spoke for all of them when he said, "Dr. Cole took an oath when she became a professor, to educate, to mentor, to do no harm. She betrayed that oath in the worst way imaginable. She used her position to prey on vulnerable students, and she used a disease as a weapon. I hope she spends every day in prison thinking about the 8 lives she destroyed." The judge sentenced Dr. Vanessa Cole to 40 years in prison, 5 years for each victim, to be served consecutively. She would be eligible for parole after serving 30 years, meaning she would be 64 years old before she could even be considered for release. She was also required to register as a sex offender, though that was largely symbolic given the length of her sentence. Dr. Cole was also stripped of her PhD, her teaching licenses, and her publications were retracted from academic journals. Her name, once associated with groundbreaking research in trauma and attachment, would now be associated only with one of the most disturbing cases of professorial misconduct in modern history. Before we close, we want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, Nigeria, or somewhere else in the world? We love knowing that our community spans across continents, united by the demand for accountability and justice. And tell us, do you think 40 years was enough? Or should she have received life? Drop your location and your thoughts in the comments. Today, Dr. Vanessa Cole is serving her sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. She has filed appeals claiming her sentence was excessive and that her journal entries were taken out of context. All appeals have been denied. She will remain in prison until at least 2051. The 8 victims have all struggled in different ways to rebuild their lives. Adrian Mitchell eventually completed his PhD but left academia, saying he could never trust the university system again after what happened. He now works as a therapist specializing in trauma, particularly trauma caused by people in positions of power. He has become an advocate for stronger protections for graduate students and for mandatory reporting of boundary violations in academic settings. Jason Rivera left his PhD program entirely and moved back to his home state of California. The stigma of his HIV status, combined with the trauma of the abuse, made it impossible for him to continue in the program where he had been victimized. He now works in tech and rarely speaks publicly about his experience. David Park completed his degree and now teaches at a small liberal arts college. He has been open about his HIV status with his students, using his experience to educate about the realities of living with HIV and the importance of disclosure and consent. Marcus Thompson, the youngest victim, struggled the most. He attempted suicide twice in the year following his diagnosis and spent time in psychiatric care. With therapy and support from the other victims, he eventually found stability. He now works as an HIV educator and activist, speaking at universities about his experience and advocating for better mental health support for people newly diagnosed with HIV. Kevin Anderson, Brandon Lewis, Tyler Washington, and Eric Martinez have all chosen to remain more private, though they participated in a joint interview in 2023 where they discussed the long-term impacts of what Dr. Cole did to them. They spoke about the daily reality of living with HIV, the medication schedules, the doctor's appointments, the disclosure conversations with potential partners, the stigma that still exists despite medical advances. People think because HIV is treatable now, it's not a big deal, Eric Martinez said in that interview. But it is a big deal. It's a chronic illness that requires lifelong medication and monitoring. It affects your relationships, your career choices, your mental health. Dr. Cole gave us a life sentence. The fact that she's only serving 40 years feels like she got off easy. The case sparked important conversations about power dynamics in higher education, about the vulnerability of graduate students, and about how institutions handle allegations of misconduct by faculty. It also brought attention to HIV criminalization laws, with some advocates arguing that while Dr. Cole's actions were clearly predatory and criminal, the case highlighted how HIV-specific criminal laws can sometimes be used inappropriately against people who are not acting with malicious intent. But there was no question about Dr. Cole's intent. Her journal made that absolutely clear. She had deliberately, methodically, and maliciously infected 8 young men as a way of exerting power and ensuring they would never forget her. In that sense, she succeeded. None of them will ever forget her. But not in the way she imagined. They remember her not as a brilliant professor or a powerful mentor, but as the woman who betrayed their trust in the most intimate and devastating way possible. They remember her as a predator who used her position to destroy lives, and they remember her as the reason they now live with HIV. This is the story of Dr. Vanessa Cole, the Columbia University professor who weaponized HIV and used it to permanently mark 8 students. This is the story of Adrian, Jason, David, Marcus, Kevin, Brandon, Tyler, and Eric. 8 men whose only mistake was trusting a professor who saw them not as students to mentor, but as victims to infect. And this is the story of how one victim's courage to speak up exposed a predator who had been operating with impunity in one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Subscribe to The Only Witness for more real crime stories that refuse to fade. Stories that expose abuse of power, demand accountability from institutions, and honor the survivors who fought for justice even when the system tried to protect their abuser. Stories that remind us that predators can hide anywhere, even behind PhDs and prestigious titles, and that speaking up, no matter how terrifying, is the only way to stop them. Real stories, real pain, real justice. This is the only witness.